I'm gonna resist saying, blessed be the fruit or under his eye. Hey everyone, I'm Eric from Lonesome Reader, and I couldn't help it. I got caught up in all of the excitement of the big release of the Testaments, one of the publishing events of the year, and so I just had this marathon reading session of reading it all of yesterday, and so I'm quite tired because I stayed up really late last night to finish it. So I wanted to give my thoughts and reactions to it with no spoilers. I'm gonna avoid doing any spoilers as much as I can, and but also address some of, I think, what are the big concerns that people have about this sequel, because there were a lot of reactions to this novel before it was even released, and some, I think, understandable concerns that people had. And now that it has been released, yeah, I have lots of mixed thoughts and feelings about it. So I'm gonna go into all of that. But yes, it was a big publishing event. I mean, this is sort of the adult Harry Potter, wasn't it? There was a big midnight release of the novel in London, where Margaret Atwood was at a bookshop and sort of announced that it could now be sold, and a number of authors were there speaking beforehand, including Jeanette Winterson, talking about the influence of The Handmaid's Tale since its publication in 1985. And I wasn't able to go to that because it sold out, and so I couldn't get tickets. But last night I did go to the cinema to see Margaret Atwood talking about the novel on screen, and this was projected. This talk was projected into over 1,300 cinemas across the whole world. And so it was really exciting sort of being there amidst the audience and feeling this collective excitement from big fans of The Handmaid's Tale and Margaret Atwood. And so she gave this talk in the National Theatre where there were readings from the novel by 3 different actresses, and then Margaret Atwood was interviewed about her process of writing the novel. And yeah, I was sort of skeptical about like how many people are actually gonna go to the cinema to see Margaret Atwood talk about this. And the audience in my cinema was about 3/4 full. And I do know, because my partner works in the film industry, so he has access to box office sales across the UK, and was able to see that, yes, Margaret Atwood's live event was the top of the box office in the UK last night, which is extraordinary that an author talk could beat the box office sales of any like Hollywood movie. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, it is like just one one-off event, but still, that's really impressive. So obviously lots of people went to see this event and were really excited about it, and it was a wonderful event. So I want to mention one of the speakers that talked at it was Anne Dowd, the actress Anne Dowd. It makes sense that she would give a reading from one of the narrators of the Testaments, Aunt Lydia, because she plays Aunt Lydia in the TV series of The Handmaid's Tale. But I want to say Anne Dowd is an extraordinary actress, and another film that she was in was called Compliance, and I'd really recommend this film. This is slightly off topic, but because a lot of the themes in it are very similar to The Handmaid's Tale. So this is an extraordinary story. Anne Dowd plays the manager of a fast food restaurant, which receives a phone call saying that one of the female employees was involved in a criminal activity and needs to be detained. And so Anne Dowd participates in detaining this female employee, and she's subsequently abused and raped by a male member of the staff, and she's sort of complicit in this. And it's because of she's caught in this system where she believes that she has no other choice, and sort of just goes along with it. And this story, Compliance, is based on real life stories, so it's so extraordinary. I'd really recommend watching this movie. But anyway, sorry, that's off topic. But also the actresses Lily James and Sally Hawkins were there reading parts from the novel, and they're both really excellent actresses too. So it was wonderful hearing the novel come alive like that, but also hear Margaret Atwood talk about it. And yeah, and it was just wonderful being part of this audience, because a lot of the time, like on BookTube, we're made to feel less alone as readers because we can share in the excitement of a reading experience. But to be in an actual cinema where everyone's so excited about the release of this novel was really extraordinary and really special. So, aside from the content or the quality of the novel, it's just wonderful to see readers coming together in this way. So yes, the plot of the Testaments, I was really glad that I reread the Handmaid's Tale recently, because it Re-familiar. I became familiar again with the plot of the novel and the whole story and construction of Gilead, because actually I'm not somebody who's been watching the TV series of The Handmaid's Tale, so it wasn't totally fresh in my memory, and that's not because of any resistance to watching the TV series. I watched the first few episodes and then I got distracted for some reason and just didn't go back to it, but I do want to go back and rewatch it because I know a lot of people are really into it, and I think I would really get into it too. So I have this nice posh new edition of The Handmaid's Tale, but then also I have this lovely beaten up old edition of The Handmaid's Tale too. And so yeah, the Testaments does continue on the story after the final scene, Offred's final scene in The Handmaid's Tale, 15 years in the future, and is narrated from 3 different perspectives. One is Aunt Lydia, who I spoke about already, and who does feature in The Handmaid's Tale when Offred is remembering her time being trained as a handmaid. She refers to Aunt Lydia a number of times as a particularly tyrannical figure who's training the girls and sort of psychologically and sometimes physically beating them into submission. And so in the Testaments, we get an account from Aunt Lydia herself, who's secretly writing these accounts and hiding them in her own personal library, because books and libraries are forbidden in Gilead, but because of Aunt Lydia's position, she's able to keep a library. And so we get her backstory and also her involvement in Gilead. And because of her position, we get a much bigger overview of how Gilead works, because, you know, in The Handmaid's Tale, Offred's account is a very limited perspective because she's not allowed to know a lot of information. So much is shielded from her, but Aunt Lydia has access and privilege to a lot more information. And she's such a fascinating character because, you know, she is somebody who was drawn into working in the system and became one of the main architects of the system of Gilead and the subjugation of women. So is a monster in some ways, but is also a woman and just has a lot of human foibles, because before Gilead came to rise, she was a high court judge with liberal leanings. And so how somebody like that comes into a position of power like this under a dictatorship and takes such a tyrannical role, I mean, that's a really fascinating journey. And there's many examples of this throughout history of people like this, characters like this who rise to power, who aren't, you know, the main figures in power, but who have a sort of backseat role, controlling things from behind the scenes. And Aunt Lydia is somebody who is a major dirt gatherer. She gathers dirt about many of the figures in power, and that's sort of how she's able to maintain her role. Yeah, so we get her account, but then we also get the account of Daisy, who also is known under an alias named Jude. And she is somebody who was born in Gilead, but has grown up in Canada. And Canada in the world of Gilead is still a democracy with sort of liberal leanings, and has an uneasy relationship with its next door nation of Gilead. And so we get the perspective of somebody who's grown up outside of Gilead, and so her voice will be much more familiar and feel much more contemporary to us, because she hasn't grown up in the system and is sort of speaking this Gilead speak. But then finally, there's the third character, the third narrator of Agnes, who did grow up in Gilead herself in a privileged family, and who's raised to be betrothed to a high-ranking officer and, you know, to become a wife. She's basically her whole life she's trained to become a wife in Gilead society. And so it's interesting how with all 3 of these narrators, these are people who were born into a particular position in society, but through changes and dramatic events, find that they have to take a very different role in the societies they live in. So the plot of the novel is tracing those transitions of these characters and the various revelations which occur about who they are and what role they play in the downfall of Gilead, because it's not a spoiler to say that there's a downfall in Gilead, because at the end of The Handmaid's Tale, it's from this very future point where there's this scholarly research being done about the history of Gilead society, which eventually fell. And I should say, we don't actually see the fall of Gilead in the novel, but we see the beginnings of the fall of that society. So I would say, as experience of the story in the novel, I was really gripped all the way throughout. I mean, obviously, because I read it all in a single day, and that wasn't just because of the excitement of being like, oh, I want to be one of the first people to read the Testaments, but because I was really interested to see how it would play out, and I was really engaged by the characters throughout. And I would say, though, that some of it is quite predictable, and the way the characters are portrayed, revelations about them, I could guess what was going to happen. So I think that is one of the shortcomings of the novel, that it sort of plays out in a way that you can probably guess and expect. But I think what really carried me through it was because Margaret Atwood is a really good writer, and the beauty of her metaphorical language that she uses throughout, and her psychological insight that she has. So, I mean, these are all three of these characters, I think, are quite complex in different ways, and the way she charts their journeys is really emotional and did really grip me. And also I was engaged of it because of just how relevant all of this felt. I mean, one of the big criticisms of Margaret Atwood writing a sequel in the first place is like, well, how is this really relevant now? And she, because she has famously said that there's nothing in The Handmaid's Tale that isn't based on real life or things that have happened throughout history already. And it's the same thing is true in the Testaments. And I feel like I can see already like very strong parallels between things that are happening in America or in Turkey or in South Africa that are really relevant of how governments are shoring up power and manipulating the larger public, the way that legislation is continuously being brought up to try to control women's bodies, how people in political offices play power games. So it does feel all very relevant and strong. And it was fascinating hearing Margaret Atwood talk about the many examples throughout history that she was drawing upon. And she talked a lot about Thomas Cromwell, who has played a pivotal role in the court of Henry VIII, which is really timely and relevant because it was just announced that Hilary Mantel will finally be publishing the third part in her trilogy about Thomas Cromwell early next year. So yeah, there's somebody else who's examining history in this way. But of course, Atwood addressed a lot of other, much more contemporary references that she was drawing upon. But yeah, both The Handmaid's Tale and the Testaments will continue to have this relevance in our society because she did draw such inspiration upon all these historic examples of things that happened in totalitarian societies like communist regimes and under Pinochet in Chile. She talked a lot about that as well because these things happened a lot and they are continuing to happen today, and they'll probably continue to happen into the future. And she spoke really poignantly about how in high pressured situations in society like this, yes, the people who are most vulnerable are women and children especially as well. And this is something that we do need to be aware of going forward, especially because she was mentioned about climate change as well, and that's something that's mentioned in the novel as well. And as climate change continues and resources become more scarce, these situations will arise again. And this is something that the character of Aunt Lydia addresses a lot. And this is a line from her, which I think is going to be quoted quite a lot because it'll continue to have relevance, where she says, "People become frightened, then they become angry. The absence of viable remedies, the search for someone to blame. Why did I think it would nonetheless be business as usual? Because we'd been hearing these things for so long, I suppose. You don't believe the sky is falling until a chunk of it falls on you. And another reason why I think Aunt Lydia is such an interesting character is because she is an older character, and this feels like a trend in Atwood's fiction recently, where she is writing from the roles of these much older characters, because Atwood herself is much older now. Like in her novel Hagseed, where she's writing from the perspective of an older director who's sort of looking back on his life and trying to establish a legacy. And Aunt Lydia, at the very beginning of the novel, witnesses the erection of a statue of herself, and so it is in this strange position of becoming an icon within her own lifetime, just like Margaret Atwood herself. You know, she's such an established and celebrated literary figure around the world, and that it must be this very strange position to be in, to sort of see your reputation grow beyond, you know, your personal circumstances in that way. So I think there's an especial poignancy to Aunt Lydia's character, because Atwood probably does feel quite emotionally close to her in some ways, though obviously Aunt Lydia is in a very different position and has taken much more dodgy decisions throughout her life than Atwood has. So I'm glad that Atwood has written this novel, and she probably took the best strategy possible in writing it, because, you know, I mean, how do you follow on from The Handmaid's Tale? And it's one of the reasons why she took so long to write it, of figuring out how she would continue on it, because ever since the publication of that novel, people have been asking for a sequel and wanting to know what happens next. And she had trouble with it for so long because she didn't know how she could continue Offred's tale, because it ends in the way that it does. And so I think it was quite clever of her to take this strategy of following these three different narrators, and to make it three different narrators, because if it was just from Aunt Lydia's perspective, I think that would have been too limited in a way. But then I know some people will object to it and have issues with it, because one of people's objections to Atwood writing a sequel was because they felt that The Handmaid's Tale was so perfect in itself that a sequel might sort of tarnish the memory of that, and sort of almost enjoyed more having such a limited perspective of Gilead as was portrayed in The Handmaid's Tale. But with the Testaments, we get such a wider view of that society. So I think if you do have those fears, you might not want to read the sequel, because it might spoil it for you in that way. But me personally, I was glad to get a much better understanding of the workings of the society and the things which might have caused the downfall of that society. And probably another big question that people will have about this sequel and want to know about it is, do we find out what happens to Offred? And for the sake of no spoilers, I'm not going to say whether she appears or not in this new novel, but yeah, it's really interesting to see how that plays out. So if you want to know, I would say just read it and find out for yourself. But yeah, overall, I did really enjoy this novel. Was it totally satisfying? No, not really. But yeah, a massive sequel like this, I mean, I think it never could be completely satisfying, or the way that I would like to see it done, because I think a lot of the objections people will have with this sequel, and I'm sure lots of people are going to be picking holes in it. I mean, they already are with reviews that have come out, are more about how we would have liked to see the story play out itself, because this is a story which has grown much beyond Atwood's own creation. You know, it's become so well known and such a part of our popular culture that we all have a strong connection with it, and how we think the characters should develop and the plot should continue on after the final scene in The Handmaid's Tale. So just to wrap up, and as a final thought, since The Testaments is currently shortlisted for the Booker Prize this year, and I'm following the prize really closely, do I think it has a chance of actually winning the prize? And I would say probably not. I mean, really, you can't tell how the judges' decisions are going to go, because they've shortlisted all these novels, so really any one of them could win. But I don't think it has a chance of winning. I think it's probably going to be the case again as it was in 1986 when The Handmaid's Tale was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. It probably won't actually win. I think the judges probably shortlisted it because of its continuing political relevancy and the strength of Atwood's writing itself. But I think the issues to do with the plot and the clunkiness of the plot and the way it all sort of conveniently comes together, I think will intrude upon its chances of actually winning the prize. But if you've read the Testaments and are reading other books in the Booker Prize, let me know if you think it has a chance of winning. But let me know your thoughts about the Testaments as well. Like, are you satisfied with the way the plot continued and the way she develops these characters? Or have you decided to actually not read the Testaments at all and just leave it aside? Let me know in the comments below and we can have a chat. But I hope you're reading good things and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye everyone.